Imagine being 13 years old, dragged from a train, beaten by a mob, and accused of a crime you never committed. Imagine being sentenced to death by an all-white jury that barely looked at the evidence because in their eyes, your black skin was all the proof they needed. This isn't fiction. This is the story of 9 boys who became the face of one of America's most infamous miscarriages of justice. The early 1930s were a time of desperation. The Great Depression left millions without work. In the South, racism was not just a social norm. It was law, written into the fabric of daily life. Black men and women lived under constant suspicion. A rumor, a glance, even being in the wrong place at the wrong time could mean death. In Alabama, racial terror was everywhere. Lynchings were public spectacles. Courtrooms were tools of white supremacy. And when black men were accused of harming white women, the verdict was decided before the trial even began. On March 25, 1931, a Southern Railway freight train carried 2 groups of desperate passengers. On one side, 9 black teenagers, some strangers to each other, riding the rails in search of work. Their ages ranged from just 13 to 19. On the other side, several white men and 2 white women, Victoria Price and Ruby Bates, both mill workers. A scuffle broke out between the groups, and the white men were thrown off the train. Furious, they reported to the station master that they had been attacked. When the train was stopped in Scottsboro, authorities stormed the cars. There, they found Price and Bates, and in that moment, fear and survival collided. To avoid being charged themselves, the 2 women made a damning claim. They said the 9 black boys had raped them. Through the town like wildfire, Scottsboro exploded with rage. Hundreds gathered outside the jail, chanting for blood. Many wanted a lynching. The sheriff, fearing the boys would be killed, ordered the National Guard to protect them. But protection did not mean fairness. In the eyes of Scottsboro, the crime was proven the moment it was spoken. The boys, terrified, confused, some barely in their teens, were branded guilty before they had even seen a lawyer. The trials began just 12 days later. 12 days. In that time, the boys barely spoke to their court-appointed attorneys. Some lawyers didn't even know their names. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with hatred. Outside, mobs waited to cheer for guilty verdicts. All-white juries filed in, many with their minds already made up. Medical examinations showed no signs of rape. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Ruby Bates herself would later admit the story was false. But in that courtroom, none of it mattered. One by one, the verdicts came down. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 8 of the boys were sentenced to death by electric chair. Only the youngest, 13-year-old Roy Wright, was spared, but not out of mercy. The jury simply couldn't agree if a child should be executed. The Scottsboro case quickly spread beyond Alabama. Civil rights groups, unions, and newspapers across America picked it up. To many, the case was not just about 9 boys. It was about the very soul of American justice. 2 groups stepped in, the NAACP and the Communist Party's International Labor Defense. Though rivals, both saw Scottsboro as a symbol of racial oppression. The case reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 1932. In Powell versus Alabama, the court ruled that the boys had been denied proper legal counsel, a landmark decision that strengthened the 6th Amendment. Later, in Norris versus Alabama, the court ruled that systematically excluding black jurors was unconstitutional. On paper, these were victories. In reality, the boys were dragged through retrial after retrial, year after year. Alabama simply refused to let go. The trials dragged on through the 1930s. Witnesses changed their stories. Ruby Bates recanted, admitting the rape never happened. Victoria Price, however, stood firm, her testimony a weapon of survival. One by one, some of the boys were released after serving years in prison. Others were paroled, but forced to live under the shadow of their convictions. Clarence Norris, one of the older boys, would spend nearly 20 years behind bars. Haywood Patterson would escape prison, only to be captured again. Their youth was stolen, their futures destroyed. They were denied education, denied freedom, denied dignity. Even when free, they were never truly free. It would take decades before the state of Alabama acknowledged its crime. In 1976, Governor George Wallace issued a pardon for Clarence Norris, the last living Scottsboro boy. But the others? Forgotten by the law, their names stained. Not until 2013, over 80 years after the trials, did Alabama grant posthumous pardons to the rest. Too late for the men who had already died, carrying the weight of false guilt to their graves. The Scottsboro Boys were victims not just of two women's lies, but of an entire system built on racism and fear. Their story forced America to confront its own hypocrisy, to question what justice truly means. Yet the lessons remain painfully relevant. Wrongful convictions still happen. Racism still poisons the justice system. And too often, innocence is not enough. 9 boys boarded a train in 1931, searching for work. They found only chains, cages, and a nation eager to sacrifice them to preserve white supremacy. The question remains, if it could happen then, could it happen again today? Share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, justice is only as strong as those who demand it.